Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Castleline Ministries podcast, where we are going through the line of Jesus. For those of you joining us this week, talking about Isaac. Connor, Asha, how are you guys?
Better now.
Good.
Better now.
Great.
What was bad?
Nah, it's just what people say.
I don't think that's what people say. Most people just say
I was
good.
like, I don't say that.
Oh, it's like, how you doing? When someone's like walking by, I'm better now that you're here. Like,
Oh,
I guess
there you
that's the
go.
whole saying. I should have said that.
I feel like you shouldn't use that phrase with anyone other than Asha.
I used it with our IT guy today. He didn't say anything else. It was awkward.
Yeah, that would be awkward. All right. Speaking of awkward, Isaac. Am I right? No.
I mean, there's some awkward stuff in Isaac's.
Yeah.
There is. Well, this is the Bible.
A
So,
lot awkward.
Yeah, that's very
Yeah.
true.
there is going to be that. So we've already kind of established before we hit record, this might be not as long of an episode, which for some people that's totally fine. There's just not as much about Isaac. So as we're going through this study, sometimes you get more content, and sometimes you get less. Isaac, overall, if we're kind of rating people, gets like a pretty good. There's a few moments though that we'll highlight that would dude, like father, like son. So, um, so why don't you guys kick it off sort of with things that stood out to you about Isaac's life, pros, cons, and we'll kind of jump around his kind of our notes, and then we'll make our way down our notes page to other areas.
Um, I'd say something that stuck out to me was I think it's more just because it was weird and I'm like, wait, what's happening? But how Isaac basically married his cousin
You know,
and then what was it? Esau? No, Jacob. Jacob ended up basically marrying a cousin.
Hmm.
If we read that right. But I'm like,
well, so Jacob then would have been like a second cousin.
okay. Still, the fact that it's in the same family is
Well,
strange
so
to
hold
me.
on. It's
Well, I
going
mean,
from Sarah, which was his sisters, and then his cousin, and now they're getting farther apart.
it does get further apart, but it starts off with Abraham marrying his half sister,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
and then cousin, and then second cousin, and that's just wasn't a thing actually for a long part of human history. Um, Not that big of a deal. It is a big deal now. So there you go. A little bit different for us, and it's not the Bible endorsing that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a phrase I've liked is this passage being descriptive or prescriptive? Like, is
Hmm.
it telling me what to do, or is it just describing what it happened? And so these are just describing what happened. If you ever hear someone trying to use this part of the Bible for like polygamy or
Yeah.
inner family stuff, it's just like, no, that's not what it's trying to teach.
Mm-hmm.
And by the fact of how awful these families end up going, yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
teaching you not to do that.
Yeah.
So,
I think one thing I'm thinking about with Isaac is how much of a back seat he sits in,
hmm
which like maybe leading by letting other people do stuff, like, but like for his wife, I mean, Abraham told his servant to look for his wife, but then like he lets his kids go out and do stuff. Um, that one part with I mean, I guess he made those wells. He made a lot of wells for the
it dug
Philistines.
a lot of wells.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know. In the short story that we do read of Isaac, he's not really out there doing a bunch, you know.
hmm
He's mostly just like trusting in other people.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Yeah, and so that does make the few things that like he does stand out. And the one that stood out to me that a casual read through, like if you're not really focused on Isaac, you just kind of read past. But it mentions that Rachel, or no, Rebecca, right? That's his
mhm.
Mm-hmm.
um that she was having a hard time having a baby, and so he prayed for her, and
Mhm.
then she conceived. And so
Mm-hmm.
that was just like, well, hey, I don't remember Abraham ever doing that
Mhm.
prayer. They just kind of waited forever. So like, hey, good for Isaac. And
Mm.
um, I think it says something there that God's the one that, blesses that. So good for him there. And
It still took 20 years for them to have a child, though,
it
but he
just
did
still take a
pray.
long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he was what, 60?
When he had them, yeah.
Mhm.
He was 40 when they got married and then 60 when they had
60.
him.
Yeah. So what you hit on, Connor, was like a theme I brought up for a lot of these guys, where it's the backseat male figure of whatever you say. It's like,
Yeah.
nah, not that wives shouldn't make decisions or be part of things or stuff, but it's just like if that's your default, one, I don't think, oh, she can speak to this. I don't think women find that attractive for a guy to just be like, oh, I don't care. So that's one
Yeah.
thing. But also, if you're biblically based, then you should be more
Mhm.
upfront making decisions.
Mhm. Um, to backtrack, like
Hmm.
when Abraham, I don't remember if we wrote this down, but when Abraham was telling the servant to pick Isaac's wife,
Hmm.
he said to put his hand on his th or under his thigh. Was there like a significance to that? Or like was that like a cultural thing of like I'm giving you instructions, so put your hand
Mm,
under my thigh or it that just stuck out to us, so I didn't know.
probably more of a cultural thing.
Asserting dominance.
Yeah.
Well, you could imagine where it puts your hand close to, and so it's a sign of trust just off the surface level. Like, I'm
Mm.
not an expert on it, but like, there's that. Um, that's an interesting question, and that's a great example. Connor, I don't think you asked me while we were recording last week. Maybe it was after. But you asked like, how do you get all this information out of stuff? So one great example is like, Asha, you're reading, you're like, well, that's interesting. You write
Hmm.
down that question, and then as you have time throughout the rest of the week, now you have a bunch of questions. You can go and research it and just kind of Google some questions and you'll find websites that pop up all the time. So Got Questions is one that I always go to because they have a lot of good explainers. Um, but you can get some good answers for people who actually studied these things. So that's my guess is some cultural thing, which is kind of cool part of the Bible because, and maybe they have proved this, but if they find, hey, look, we found this little tablet and it describes this ritual of this time where people would put their hand under the thigh, it's like, well, hey, the
Hmm.
Bible described that, more proof and evidence. So it's cool that those details are included, even if we don't know the full details.
Hmm.
Sounds like a good Google question for this week.
Yeah.
Um, I had one thing, and this kind of shows up in my foreshadowing of Christ. Um, but how Isaac and his love and marriage with Rebecca was sort of a good model for God's view of marriage today. And it's kind of foreshadowing of like how Isaac prayed for Rebecca is similar to how Jesus prays for the church, the
Hmm.
Hmm.
bride. So that's sort of my foreshadowing there. Isaac obviously being kind of portrayed as the son from our discussion last week, praying for the bride. So, and it's kind of cool that, you know, God had this promise with Abraham, I'll give you tons of kids. And he could have just given Abraham a ton of kids, but instead it was like through three people, now there's all the kids. And so it's just like, God the Father, Son, Spirit, three, I don't know if there's a
Oh,
correlation there for like, I don't know if that's a Holy Spirit thing, just a coincidence thing, just
I mean, if Jacob was the Holy Spirit, he did provide the fruit and the food.
I'm not saying that like you can do a one to one.
I know.
He's the son, so all these things apply. But I'm just saying
Yeah.
he could have done it in just one generation, chose three, so that way when we talk about um, I almost said founding fathers, but that's us. The what do they call them? Just the fathers?
Forefathers?
Yeah. Patriarchs, the patriarchs, they're talking about three people. So, yeah. Let's go into his strengths and weaknesses. What were some of the times that he was glowing and sometimes that he wasn't? Ooh, I got a good one.
Um, what did I say? I said a weakness is he was easily deceived. Um, well, I wouldn't say easily deceived, but like when it came to Jacob and Esau and his wife was plotting because Jacob was her favorite, and
Mhm.
when it came to the blessing of like all it took for him to believe that Jacob was Esau was the goat's fur and the fact that it smelled like he had been
Right.
outdoors. It wasn't like, oh, let's have a conversation and you
Right.
know. So,
Yeah.
You sound
but
like Esau or Jacob, but you feel like Esau.
yeah,
Yeah, that's all right. We'll go forward.
Good
yeah,
enough.
yeah. But I'd say deceived. He was deceived.
Hmm.
And I think I had another one, but I can't remember at the
Deceived
moment.
and he was deceitful as
Hmm.
well.
Yeah.
Trying to pull the same tricks his dad did. Oh, it's my sister.
Hmm.
I
This
think
one is
with
a total lie.
yeah, yeah, not even half truth there.
I feel like he definitely had to have been trusting. Like, you go back to last week, he was trusting his dad. Hey, dad, there's no ram. And then, like, oh, we'll find it. Okay.
Mhm.
And so he like has trust in his leadership,
Hmm.
um, and all that, which I think, I don't know if that's, um, how he, sorry, I'm distracted now. Um, like how he became a leader,
Yeah.
but
Well, and overall, he was faithful to God. There's a
yeah,
huge description about how God blessed him in his crops and he reaped a hundredfold,
yeah.
similar to the parable that we get in the New Testament. Um, my biggest weakness for his was that he picked favorites. This is actually for both him and his wife,
Hmm.
picking favorites. Um, I mean, you just don't let the kids know,
Yeah.
obviously. Um,
Right now
which
we have
just leads to
to
problems.
worry about that.
Yeah, he'll learn though.
Yeah.
I'm like, why don't they love me anymore? We do. We just don't have time. New patience.
Um, but one of his strengths, though, I think anytime in the Bible, I've been kind of interested in this for a long while, but like the idea of like a parent or grandparent doing a blessing, it's
Mhm.
obviously not really something that we see in today's culture. And I'm
Hmm.
not saying there's like a magic power to their blessing, but just the idea of like this is somebody that we respect, we have honor for, and they have this reserved. It's just words, but it's I think impactful.
Yeah.
Um,
They don't repeat them either, so it's like he could have given it to both kids.
right.
Basically,
And if he would have given it to both kids, all that does is just water down
yeah.
what it is. And
Yeah.
so he's having the integrity to say, well, I've already given what I've said. So,
Yeah. I thought it was cool though how like when Jacob flees and goes to bed, he has a dream of like the angels ascending and descending, and then the Lord talks to him.
mhm,
Um, which I told Connor, I'm like kind of like piggybacking on what you said of like people don't really give blessings anymore.
mhm.
But I'm like, if they did and that was the experience, like that'd be super cool. Of
Yeah.
like, man, I was just blessed by my father, and now my other father is telling
Mhm.
me my blessing
Yeah.
too. So,
Oh, that's a cool connection that he gets that blessing, flees, and then gets a connection to the, yeah.
mhm.
I didn't have that happen. Dad gave me a blessing at on my wedding day, and then I did not have a stairway to heaven dream. So very cool.
I think going off the talking about the blessings and stuff, that's what I have down for like the foreshadowing of Christ.
Hmm.
Like I think we can relate to Jacob in the fact that like we didn't deserve that birthright. We actually deserve a death right,
Hmm.
but we were given that birthright slash, you know, we like we didn't deserve it.
Well,
God, you know.
ooh, I kind of like where you're going with that.
Yeah.
And if you were to, I wouldn't say that it's a prophecy, but you
Yeah.
could use it as an analogy. Esau would sort of represent um, the Jews who
Hmm.
should have inherited it all, but many refused. And so instead, the blessing went to Jacob, the Gentiles. You could view it that way.
And that's probably where it kind of gets weird because Jacob is the
He is the Israelite.
Israelites.
His name is Israel. So, like I
So
said, not a prophecy. I'm just saying you could use that as a metaphor.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, oh, that's good. Um, Under personal application. So, well, it's a short story, not as much about Isaac, but just curious about what you guys kind of put down for a personal application. I'll start for this one. Number one, and this is something I need to be reminded of, be a passionate prayer for your spouse, prayer for your spouse. Um, and then the other is that when your vision is unclear, then you can be taken advantage of, which I think goes to Osh's point.
Mm.
Like sorry, Isaac's vision is literally unclear, and so he's taken advantage of. But if your world, like life vision and purpose, isn't clear, likewise, you're going to be taken advantage of.
Mhm.
I kind of don't understand what I put down. Like
Yeah.
I put down obedience to leadership, which the only thing I can think of how that applies is like to what his dad said, Abraham, to like trust on his dad and his leadership. Um, and so like I don't know. I feel like maybe that's where I was falling apart because I'm like, I don't understand why I wrote this down. I think there is a very good trait to have though, is like
Hmm.
those God puts in your life um to lead you, whether
Yeah.
you agree with him or not. He is calling you to be obedient to a degree, like up till like it compromises your faith and like, or at least like respect your leadership.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm trying to remember in the rest of the story how that can relate, but yeah.
Well, and our times, what does that look like? And that would be the example that comes to my mind. It's like when you're in a church,
Hmm.
you know, church is made up of humans, so your church leadership isn't always going to do what you think is right. And this is
Hmm.
something, you know, I've struggled with, that's deal with is, I have these other ideas. I think it would be better this way. Church is doing things different and trying not to be bitter or harbor resentment towards what the church is deciding to do. And I just try to remind myself I'm not working with as much data as they've got.
Hmm.
Maybe they've tried my ideas and those flop. Like, I don't know. And so it's just like, whereas I see a lot of people, so it's kind of like it's the kind of putting down my desires and things and just deferring to the leadership that I've agreed to put myself into. Now, if they did something crazy out of line, then it's something different. But I see a lot of people leaving churches just because of like, I don't like and agree with that. It's like very, very weak stuff for
Mhm.
leaving a church, and you're going to find something bad at every church you go to. So our 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 idea is like, no, you stick with the church. That's going to be your community, and
Yeah.
yeah,
I
Mhm.
feel like that's kind of like right, we're gonna get into like a tangent here, the king of
we
tangents.
knew it was you.
Yeah. But like that's kind of like a big problem with current culture of in general, just like I'm just seeing it in younger people that I like work with or see around that when it comes to being corrected by your leadership, they don't take it and understand that it's not an attack on
Yeah.
you. It's like, hey, as a leader, I'm also responsible for what you produce. Like, so I
Mhm.
just see offense being taken all the time, and like it's an attack on their truth, which is like, so all of this gets kind of like
You
it just
know, my favorite phrase, being a science teacher, my truth. What?
science doesn't care about your truth, bro.
Logic, reason, the world doesn't care if it's your truth. But
Mm,
that's a
Mhm.
different argument.
yeah, but
Hmm.
Well, I would say like my personal application, I think would be like when it comes to like in this instance of like Isaac blessing Jacob, like
Hmm.
after he was blessed, no one could take that away from him.
Hmm.
And so like I guess if I put that in today's of like whether it's someone blesses you or like God gives you your like purpose or calling, like no one can take
Hmm.
that away from you.
Yeah.
Um, and so I guess that would be kind of my what I'm taking away from
mm,
that, walking away from. But I think it's super cool.
There's
Uh,
a book written by someone who has survived through the Holocaust, similar to that idea of like he was just like, they can control this, they can control all this, but
mhm,
there's a part of me, my thoughts, who I am, they can't control that. And that's what
mhm,
he focused on while he was in the camps
mm,
to make it
mhm,
through. And is like, there are parts that was like, that's all you. No, now you can allow things to influence it. And I think
mhm.
that might be a good thing for people to focus on is what are you allowing to influence
Yeah.
who you are and your mind and that
yeah.
stuff.
Mhm.
You should be only allowing Castelline Ministries to speak to you.
Yee. That's a lot of pressure.
Scribe.
Yeah.
Very cool. Like we said, this was going to be a shorter one. Um, unless you guys got any other things that popped up. Um, you kind of teed up a few of the stories there with Jacob Asha, and he's a more interesting character.
Mhm.
The guy who was promised from the get-go, like while they're in the womb, it's like, hey, the younger one's gonna be the greater one. And
Hmm.
yet he spends his whole life fighting to earn everything. It's like
Mhm.
he was already promised it.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Have you noticed any patterns so far within these character studies? Or is that you're gonna reveal that later? Is that something you're trying
Patterns in terms of
to I don't know. I guess I was trying to like give some more hello, thought to
um
what we've been like kind of bring it back to
mhm.
all of the rest and like combine them. We've done it a
Sure.
couple of reasons, so
Um so patterns might not be the right word, but you could certainly think about themes.
yeah.
So what themes are running through? And that's actually good you bring up back when we were talking about Adam and Eve, we had that prophecy about who's going to be the one to
Mhm.
smash the head of the snake. And so as I read through these different stories, I kind of always have that in mind. If you're like the first time reading these stories, that's what you got in mind. You're like, oh, okay, Abraham, oh, he seems great. Oh, he kind of had some flaws. Maybe he's not, but his son, he was willing to sacrifice himself. That's pretty good. Is Isaac the one? So you're constantly having that in your mind. Um, so you also see, and this is where if you know the original Hebrew, you can see this pop up more. But the language that's used in the Genesis story of the fall in Eden will get used a lot in a lot of these stories. So I know like for Abraham, when it's talking about um, how with Hagar, how they treated her, and he had a kid with her. The language very reminiscent from the fall story, where there's the language that they look and they see this is good, and they take her, like they take the fruit. So you'll see that sort of stuff. So the authors are trying to make these connections. It's easier to see those when you know the original language, but yeah.
That did remind me. They did mention that Isaac and Ishmael, is that his son's name?
Hmm.
Hagar's son.
Yeah,
They buried Abraham
together. Yeah,
together, which I was like, I never thought of them like kind of being
cool with
close,
each other.
close or
Brothers.
cool at least with each
Yeah.
other, or at least they came together to bury Abraham and then went their separate ways.
It was kind of their parents that was causing all
That's true.
the ruckus. So it's, there is a bit of hope there that like, hey, we can get along.
Mhm.
But I bet if you look at the list of names coming from Ishmael, the original readers would be like, "Ooh, yeah, not going to get along for very long.
Yeah.
Not with those Emilites, Pashurites, all the otherites." So, but you see that played out again with Jacob and Esau.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So,
Cain and Abel.
cast line siblings.
Jared and Cameron.
Jared
No,
and
we're-
Jared and no one. That was not.
We all get along great, kind of like Isaac's or Jacob's sons. He sold me off to
Oh, yeah.
slavery once. It's okay. I'll forgive you.
We'll forgive you. You're the king of Egypt now, right?
Currently, I live with my parents still. So no.
We're getting there.
Ironically, trying to move to a desert.
There you go.
Sure.
You're going on your wilderness journey.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Our friends, when they moved out to Arizona, I wrote them a nice little thing about, and I think I included something about going in the wilderness. So
That's
I miss those guys.
cool. Mhm.
If you're listening, Greg, miss you.
Name drop.
Yeah.
Shout out to Greg.
Greg, you'll be somewhat neighbors. Phoenix is a big area,
It's
so he's
huge.
still like an hour and a half away from you.
Yeah.
Well, all right. Let's go ahead and end it there. I hope you guys are enjoying this series. Like I said, when you kind of focus in on the characters specifically, you tend to read the Bible a little bit differently. So I hope you're getting new stuff out of it. I always do. And we'll pick this up next week as we talk about Jacob. All right. Thanks. Bye.